Good evening and welcome. This will be the first recording of what will be the podcast known as Enough is Enough. As you know, there's a million podcasts out on YouTube, very famous names, whether it be Megyn Kelly, Joe Rogan, the list goes on, and amazing news stations like Newsmax, etc. Um, and they all talk about topical events and things that are going on in the world, giving their perspectives of those things. And we will cover those kinds of things, but I have a deeper plan for this podcast. You see, I firmly believe that so many of these things are connected. And what I want to share with you is what that connection is, what's the drivers, and what are some of the assumptions we need to be able to make for informed decisions in our lives and to say enough is enough and fight back, so to speak. Um, there's some things we all need to take as gospel, so to speak, that you go into this understanding. First, understand who I am. I research quite a bit. Left wing, right wing, whatever wing you want to call it, chicken wing. And I see patterns. And those patterns tell a story. And this is important. You know, there's a saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. And that's very much what's presented to us today is the trees. You know, this tree, that tree, whether it be gender, the border, the economy, Ukraine, you name it, race relations. These are all the trees. But in order to really guide your life, you need to see the forest as a whole and understand where these things are going, what's their purpose. So let's start with a couple of premises. This is not actually a podcast. This is actually the first video testing out the camera and the microphone. I'm sure I'll get better at it. And when I do the podcast, I'll invite people to come in and make comments and ask questions. But let's start with some premises or premise. First is all commercial media lies. They have an agenda, they have a story they want to press, and they know that the multitude of people will take whatever they say pretty much as gospel. Now, you or I may say, well, I don't believe that station, I don't believe this other station. And that's good, but they all lie, and they lie for a purpose. All politicians lie, some more than others. Some really try, but it's still part of a bigger picture. Think of politicians as middle management. They are there supposedly to represent us, but they don't represent us, the common man, woman. They represent agendas. And they drive those agendas by telling us stories that are either palatable to us or believable by us to satisfy that agenda. And that's pretty sad. My mom always had a saying, and I take it to heart. It was, believe none of what you read and half of what you see. And she didn't mean don't believe anything ever, but basically put a critical eye on everything you see. And these are the journeys we're going to take across with us, whether it be climate change, as I say, gender, race relations, Ukraine. It's all connected. And you have to understand that. It is all connected. It is not rich versus poor. Poor don't count. Middle class doesn't count. It's rich versus rich and their schemes, their ideas of how things should be. If you think about any country, whether it's a democracy, whether it believes in capitalism or socialism or communism, who are the people that don't hurt? Are the rich affected in socialism? The elite in communism? You still have the elite. Who hurts are the people. And the United States has become that way too. We are the ones hurting. The billionaires, the millionaires, they're not hurting. They're not feeling anything other than maybe a squeeze in their stocks, in some of their businesses, but other than that, they're above this. And there are some that are so far above this, they'll never feel the squeeze. And that's the things we want to talk about. That's the things we want to understand. What are you being sold? The first thing to understand, besides the fact that commercial media lies and politicians lie, is what is the role of the media? The role of the media used to be almost like a fourth branch of government. You have the judicial, you have the executive, the president, and you have the legislative, right? But the media, in many ways in the past, held all three of those accountable. The Watergate break-in, various things that came to light, Pentagon Papers. Going blank at the moment, but they were responsible for getting the truth out to the people. And that changed. That changed in the past few decades to getting information out to the people like propaganda. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that 40 years ago or 50 years ago there wasn't bias in the media, that the media didn't have a left-leaning or a right-leaning or a middle-of-the-road leaning take on things. It just means, though, that they are now mega controlled to send the same message. I am sure you have all seen on YouTube where they show the various TV stations syndicated across the United States, all saying the same message. Now, how is it that in Sioux Falls, local TV has the same dialogue as ABC News in New York and San Francisco and Miami and Little Rock and everything? Same exact words. Well, obviously because they're provided with those words. And whether it's corporate or in conjunction with the government or whoever to get these messages out. And we know this from the Twitter files. I mean, the government definitely gets involved in these things. So another premise, don't ever think that the government is incapable of doing very corrupt things and very lying blatantly. I mean, we've been lied to for decades about Kennedy. We've been lied to for decades. And this undisputed proof about UFOs. Okay? No, they don't exist. You're crazy if you say you saw one. Even, trained pilots and people in law enforcement. No, this doesn't exist and the government doesn't investigate that. And, of course, that's all come out. Yeah, we've investigated it for decades and now we're going to take a serious look at it. These were lies. These were blatant lies told to the public to get you to think a certain way, that anybody who reported anything like this was a nut job. And this goes on constantly. Our energy, and I'm going to touch on that because that's a good starting topic. If you watched Senator Kennedy in some of the recent Senate hearings talking about energy and green energy and everything along those lines, he basically questioned the people who are pushing this to say, all right, to get us to near zero carbon footprint by 2050, how much dollars are we talking about? And there's a lot of hemming and hawing, of course, and not giving direct answers. But the bottom line is it came down to about $50 trillion. And then they further asked the questions of, okay, and how much will that reduce the global temperature if we were to spend $50 trillion, which is just astounding, just those numbers. $50 trillion in the budget just on that. And they wouldn't give an answer. And of course they won't give an answer. And here's why. The United States makes up about 13% of the carbon footprint being exhausted into the climate. The UK about 3%. the huge percentage, and I have a graph on this, I'll show it in a later podcast because I can't pull that up right now, is China. China is something like 70%. Okay, so if you can't get all these other countries that are carbon emitters to do this, how are you going to change anything? And the take on that side is, well, if the United States leads, everybody else will follow. That's the biggest pile of horse crap I've ever heard. Who says if we do this and we spend all this money, people will follow? You know, a good example of that is NATO. You know, for decades, we've spent billions and thinking, well, if we lead and be the primary funder of their budget, they'll follow. Well, they don't follow. It wasn't until Trump took office and said, look, if you're not going to pay your fair share, we're not going to pay anymore. And I'm not going to talk about Donald Trump and how you feel about him or not. I have my own personal feelings, and they may come out. But my point being is this ludicrous idea that we spend $50 trillion with a harebrained plan that we don't even know if it's going to change anything. And we don't even know 100% if all the countries did it, would it change anything? Because the earth goes through global cycles. All right. But if you listen to the media, if you listen to the politicians, if you listen to the bandwagon, climate change, climate change, climate change, we have to do something. We're going to do this. And they're putting the cart before the horse with, well, we're going to ban gas stoves and we're going to ban fossil fuels and we're going to do all of these things. And you're paying for it now. But they really don't have anything in place to replace it. The probably one of the best replacements for energy generation is nuclear. And they've actually cut the budget on that. They've increased the budget for renewable resources over 40%, and actually reduced the budget on things like fossil fuels and nuclear. Nuclear is clean energy. They've so advanced the technology, it's incredible. But you don't hear that. They aren't processing that. You go to all electric in your home. You go to an electric vehicle. You go to an electric stove. You go to electric. That electricity comes from somewhere. It comes from energy generation locations. And many of those are either hydro or they use fossil fuels. Okay? They're not nuclear. They're not zero emissions. And so you're just trading one horse for another and not really doing anything. But that's not what the news tells you. The news is there to brainwash you. And it works. It works. Dear audience, hopefully you are the type of people who are not led by propaganda. But you have to be honest about society. People like to be led. And they are led. What they hear on the news, they take as gospel. Especially, as we know, if you say something often enough, even if it's a lie, it becomes the truth. Russia, Russia, Russia. Collusion, collusion, collusion. And it takes years for the truth to come out that that was a hoax, who funded it, how did it come about, that our alphabet, shadow groups, FBI, CIA, NSA, etc., push this idea. And again, this is against the American people. We have a right to the truth. We have a right to understand what's going on. We need to see the bigger picture. So I'm going to end this. I want to keep it at 15 minutes for the initial podcast. I thank you for tuning in, and I promise you some exciting conclusions in terms of looking at things and saying, what's this really about? Why are we being led down a certain road? Who does this benefit? And why is it that we don't count? And we really don't count. We're just cogs in serfs in a kingdom of very elite, very wealthy, that have their own concept of how things should be run. And again, they use politics and this middle management to get those things done. I'm not espousing the benefits of the military industrial complex or the oil or pharmaceuticals or whatever, but remember, every one of them has an agenda. And to push that agenda, they will use the politicians, they will use the media to make your mind think a certain way. So I thank you if you've tuned into this first. Please like and subscribe. As I said, I'm just getting used to the hardware. I will in future have these as podcasts where people can actually come in. I will announce it's coming in live and can make comments and tell me I'm all wet or ask me questions, whatever it may be. Have a great evening.